Welcome, I'm Diane and thank you so much for joining me for what is actually my very first recording. I'm going to be diving right into it today and talk about goal setting. And I want to share what I learned are the biggest mistakes in goal setting, as well as some of my own process. So if this sounds like something that you might be thinking about at the moment, then let's dive into it. It feels really fitting to be talking about goal setting for my first recording because so much of my own process is the reason why I'm here, even recording this at all. But I'll get into that in a minute. What I want to begin with is something that really changed the way that I even approach goal setting in the first place. And that is the 10x rule. And it is an idea by Grant Cardone in his book called The 10x Rule. And in it, Cardone proposes that there are 4 big mistakes that we make when it comes to goal setting. And I just want to share what those are with you. They are setting goals that are too low, underestimating the actions, resources, money, and energy required, competing, not dominating, and I'll come back to that in a second, and 4, underestimating the resilience required. So essentially what Cardone is proposing is that it is setting our goals too low that is the reason why we lose our motivation. But let's talk about this idea of competing, not dominating, being a mistake. I know this can seem potentially jarring to some people because it can come across as overly aggressive, but I think it's actually a really interesting proposition because it says that when we compete, we are setting ourselves up for a losing game because there is always going to be someone that we perceive is achieving more than us. And so we are going to be stuck in this comparison cycle. But when we set ourselves up in a dominating game, we are setting ourselves up to win because we are finding our unique space in the marketplace. We are putting in the actions that other people might not necessarily be willing to do. So the 10x rule then is based on 2 key elements. That is 10xing your initial goals and 10xing the action required. Now, to share just a little bit of my own personal experience when it comes to the 10x rule, I want to talk about the blog that I created last year. Some of you may know it is where I talk about personal branding, marketing, business, and development. When I initially was planning this blog, I was considering how often I would publish. And initially I thought maybe once a month might be a fair effort because I know the level of work and time that is required in each article. But then I read the 10x rule and I realized how much I was limiting my thinking. And I went from the idea of potentially having 12 blogs after the whole year to quite literally 10xing that initial thinking and having closer to 120 blogs after 1 year. So when it comes to your own goals, think about how you might be limiting your thinking and how you might be able to 10x your initial goal. But the 10x rule for me is more about a mindset. My process actually starts by beginning with the end in mind. And if this sounds familiar, it is because it is an idea from the very popular book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And in it, Covey talks about something that a lot of people in his space actually advocate for. And that is something that might actually sound a little bit confronting to you. It is to picture your own funeral. Who will be there? What might they be saying about you? How will you be remembered? The idea behind this is that picturing your own funeral will allow you to better understand what your definition of success looks like as well as the values that are most important to you. To share just a little bit of my own personal experience when it comes to techniques like this, you may know that in the last couple of years, I lost two people that were really dear to me. That was my grandma and my dad. And as a part of that experience, I had the privilege of speaking as a part of their eulogy. And when you are putting words to someone's entire life experience, it really makes you understand the value of exercises like picturing your own funeral and understanding how you want to be remembered, because it sets you up to actually create meaningful goals that get you closer to where you see that end vision being. But once you have this big vision, you have to reverse engineer it. And that is where I then look at what I want the next 10 to 15 years to look like. And I use the SMART formula for this, but I do it in a little bit of a different way. Now, if you're familiar with the traditional SMART formula, it is to set goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. But with this 10x mindset, it actually feels a little bit safe. So what I propose instead is to replace the A in the SMART formula, achievable, with audacious, and the R, realistic, with resilient. And this comes back to remembering what one of those biggest mistakes is when it comes to goal setting, and that is underestimating the resilience required. I then break this down even further to bring it closer to the short-term future. So what do the next 5 years look like? And when I think about the next 5 years, I think about my next 5 moves. And this is an idea that comes from Patrick B. David in his book called Your Next 5 Moves. And in it, he proposes thinking like a grand chess master. So having a strategy for knowing where you want to go and how you're going to get there. But I understand that knowing what your next 5 years looks like can be difficult to prioritize. So that is where I love to bring in a technique from a personal brand expert called Mike Kim. And Kim proposes strategizing like a Chinese zodiac when it comes to looking at your goals in terms of years. So what is your year of? So for me, 2023 was the year of blogging. So for you, what is 2024 the year of? So traditionally in business, we'll often look at quarters, and that is most likely going to be January to March, March to June, and so on. But I think another way that you can look at your goals is to think about the actual seasons. You might feel differently in summer than you do in winter, for example. And even in business planning, we usually take into account what the wider environment is doing at the time, because it affects the way that people behave and maybe how they're feeling and thinking. And so I take this into account when it comes to my own goals as well. But you don't have to just be restricted to the physical seasons either. They could be cultural seasons too. For example, you might feel differently in the festive season around Christmas and New Year as you do to the rest of the year. So how are you taking this into account when it comes to your goal setting? But my final step when it comes to goal setting is to think in baby steps. I had a friend once say to me, start before you think you're ready, because you'll never feel ready. When it comes to goal setting, it can be really easy to get caught up in perfectionism, which can also then lead to procrastination and not actually doing anything about those goals that you had at all. So when it comes to your big vision, how can you begin with that next baby step? Maybe it is submitting a form, maybe it is sending a quick text, maybe it is making a phone call. Whatever it is, what is that small baby step that is going to set into motion what your big vision is? Thank you so much for joining me. If you have found any of this valuable, do please let me know by subscribing or commenting or liking wherever you are, and I look forward to seeing you in the next recording.